To our nominee today, thank you for being willing to step up and take on what is considered by most to be a thankless task. I think it's a really important role, and as you know, I was involved in the 1990s on the IRS commission that Senator Bob Kerrey and I co-chaired. I think Ben Cardin mentioned it earlier. Ben Cardin and I were the two House co-sponsors of that legislation, and the idea was to reform and restructure the IRS so that it would be more responsive to taxpayers' needs, particularly focused on taxpayer service, and to help regain trust in the IRS. At that time, the IRS was at the bottom of the heap in terms of federal agencies and departments, efficiency, trust, morale, and there have been some good steps taken. Unfortunately, I think what happened recently with regard to the IRS targeting certain groups based on their political views reversed a lot of that progress. And I don't have to tell you that there's a real concern now about public trust in this institution again, and so you're going to have your work cut out for you to try to restore that sense of public trust. I got involved in this a couple years ago when Ohio groups started to send me correspondence they'd gotten from the IRS and other information that led me to send a letter to the Deputy Commissioner back in March of 2012, never responded to initially, and then finally responded to by saying everything's fine. Unfortunately, we learned that wasn't true, so I feel like I was misled in a way. So I've been following this closely and continue to believe that there's a need for more transparency, more information as to how this happened, why it happened. So I hope that should you be confirmed, which I expect you will be with my support, that you'll be willing to really dig into this and get to the bottom of it and be able to provide this committee the answers that Chairman Baucus and Senator Hatch have asked for, but also some of us have asked for individually, so that we can begin to repair this sense of trust that I think has been reversed and eroded through the process. So I guess the question I would ask for you, are you prepared to undertake that task, and then to the extent you find there was misconduct that has not already been dealt with, or perhaps it's not been dealt with appropriately, to take swift action to ensure that there are meaningful consequences for those who are responsible for the misconduct?
Yes, Senators, I've already committed with Senator Hatch generally. If confirmed, I look forward to working with this committee generally, but particularly to make sure you have all the information you need to conclude the investigation and to respond appropriately to whatever the findings are. I think also within the IRS, we need to make sure that we provide employees with appropriate training and support and structure to ensure that they have the resources necessary to make appropriate decisions when they're confronted with challenging questions, and that we don't end up in these situations going forward. But ultimately, going forward, I think it's important for us to be transparent. As I noted in my testimony, I think congressional inquiries, especially if there are numerous inquiries from a wide range of constituency, are an important source of information that there's a problem worth pursuing. And if confirmed as Commissioner, I'm pleased to commit that we'll share all of that information with you. If there are difficulties we're confronting, this committee will know about them promptly, and that ultimately whatever goes on in the agency is the responsibility of the Commissioner. So that I want employees to know, and I want the committee to be comfortable that my position going forward is, if we have a problem, ultimately it's my problem, and the employees need to understand that we're all in it together. There's a problem, we're going to find it as quickly as we can, we're going to fix it, we're going to make sure it stays fixed, and we're going to be transparent about it, but ultimately we're all accountable for whatever goes on in that organization.
I guess this accountability you're talking about would require some sort of consequences if you do find that people have engaged in some of these improper activities, and are you prepared to do that as well?
Yes, I think that appropriate accountability is important. Acting Commissioner Werfel has set up an accountability review board to look into actions here, and also he's undertaken and completed an investigation, see if there are other similar problems across the agency, and fortunately did not find any. But I do think that our employees have to be held accountable for actions that they take. But at the same time, I think we need to understand that there are oftentimes mistakes made that are mistakes that are simply mistakes, and we need to ensure we understand why they were made and make sure they're not made again. But every mistake doesn't necessarily mean that somebody gets fired.
Chairman, I'd like to ask another question, but I'd like to, since my time is up, if we could have a quick second round. It's about tax-exempt organizations.
I think
Give
Senator
Mr.
Thune's
Thune a
still
chance
getting
to ask.
ready. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Okay. As you know, there are these new rules for tax-exempt social welfare organizations and their political activities. These were proposed just a week ago. I understand that the proposed rules are meant to try to clarify some confusion that I acknowledge is out there, and some ambiguity with regard to the distinction between campaign intervention and social welfare activity, as well as regarding the measure of an organization's social welfare activities relative to its total activities, which are all parts of the current regs that probably could use some additional clarification. Have you had the opportunity to review these proposed rules, and if so, do you have an opinion on them? Do you support them?
I've had an opportunity just to look at them in the public domain. Obviously, I did not participate in the development of them. They raise a set of very important questions and have sought, I think, active comment and participation in the public in responding to the two basic questions that are, what is the definition of political activity that will count against the social welfare activities of an organization, and what amount of otherwise not allowed political activity can you engage in as an organization before you run the risk of decertification. I think an important question that Senator Hatch has raised and others have raised is, whatever the definition of political activity, to which of the 501c organizations should it apply? And I think it is important for whatever decision the IRS finally makes for people to see it as a decision made by an nonpartisan, independent organization that is trying to treat everyone fairly, so that those applying for any application feel that the response is going to be straightforward and even-handed across the board.
In particular, there's a concern that some of us have that the IRS isn't very good at getting into political activity, and that there could be some political speech that is affected by some of these new rules. One thing that I looked at that concerned me was that C4s have to remove any records of office holder votes or public statements from their websites 2 months before an election. There's another one that says C4s have to they can't publicly talk about a president's judicial nominee from February 2nd to a national election some 9 months later. It seems sort of arbitrary, one, but two, it seems like that's getting the IRS in the middle of political stuff. And I guess my question to you is, does this concern you that some of these proposed rules might further entangle the IRS in making political judgments and open the door to more potential mischief, as we've seen over the last couple years?
Well, I think it's all important to be reviewed. I think the goal of the regulations, and ultimately the final regulation, will be to get the IRS out of politics as much as possible rather than into it. I think part of the difficulty with the previous regulations and their implementation was the lack of clarity meant that the IRS had to make a whole series of political judgments on what counted and what didn't count. And the goal of the regulations, and I think ultimately my hope would be that you end up with clarity so that it is relatively easy for applicants to decide, for the reviewers to decide, and for people running an organization to decide which political activity counts in the bucket that you're not supposed to be doing and which does not, and that the lines are clear enough that the IRS itself is not making those distinctions, that they are made and they're clear in the regulations, and the organizations all understand that and can respond accordingly. So I think the point is well taken. I think everybody would like to make sure the IRS is involved in political decisions to the minimum amount necessary.
There's a recent statement that was made by taxpayer advocate, and this is Nina Olson in her June report to Congress. She said it may be advisable to separate political determinations from the function of revenue collection. That seems to me to make sense, and I guess my thought is, are there steps that you believe you can and should take to further depoliticize the IRS and take away some of those responsibilities. And I guess what you're saying is, by establishing some standards that are clear, that helps. But the question is still, are these political judgments appropriate to be made, or is that something that should be done in a different way? Let me give you one suggestion, and that's that the IRS follow, for example, the determinations of the FEC, Bipartisan Federal Election Commission, on questions about, what a group's political status is. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we're going to get a lot of comments in response to the regulations, and I would hope that some would include this discussion as well. I think when the dust settles, the goal really has to be, what can we do to ensure the public that to the maximum extent possible, the IRS is in the business of tax administration, not in the business of making political decisions. And as I say, my goal, if confirmed as commissioner, in reviewing with the Treasury the final regulations, would be, to the extent possible, to make the rules clear enough so that the decisions are not being made by the IRS on a case-by-case basis. They are clear in the regulations, and everyone running an organization, everyone trying to set up an organization would understand very easily what they're allowed to do and what is not permissible if they want to be a 501c organization.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence, and Senator Thune, and again, I appreciate your willingness to serve in this important capacity. I think it's a critical time to restore trust, and given your experience and background, I think you will have an opportunity to do just that. So thank you, Mr. Scott.